one DAB member, and I haven't heard whether he's going to join us. So, but I guess we'll go ahead and get started. So I would like to kick the meeting of the October 11th meeting of the Design Advisory Board. And so I'd like to call to order. I think at this point, someone read some ground rules. I'm going to go ahead and do that, Devin.
Sure thing. Thank you, Mr.
Okay.
Chair. Alrighty, I'll go ahead and share my screen here for the time being. Because there is an open comment section for this meeting, there are a few ground rules and rules of decorum to go ahead and read and follow throughout this meeting and throughout the public participation process. So the city has engaged with community members to co-create a vision for productive, meaningful, and inclusive civic conversations. This vision supports physical and emotional safety for community members, staff, and board and commission members, as well as the democracy for people of all ages, identities, lived experiences, and political perspectives. The following are examples of rules of decorum found in the Boulder Revised Code and other guidelines that support this vision. These will be upheld during this meeting. All remarks and testimony shall be limited to matters related to city business. No participant shall make threats or use other forms of intimidation against any person. Obscenity, racial epithets, and other speech and behavior that disrupts or otherwise impedes the ability to conduct the meeting are prohibited. Participants are required to identify themselves using the name they are commonly known by, and individuals must display their whole name before being allowed to speak online. Currently, only audio testimony is permitted online. Come time for public participation, there's one quick, easy way to go ahead and let us know that you're interested. At the bottom of your screen, you will see a raise hand icon. And once we get to the public participation section, all you have to do is click that button, and that will let us know on our end that you want to speak during the public comment. Also, if you're on a phone, you can raise your hand by clicking *9, and that will also raise your hand on there. And with that, I will turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thanks. Let me start with a roll call. Let's start with DAB members, and then we'll go to city staff, and then the applicant representatives who are here. So I'm Todd Bryan, DAB chairperson.
Rory Bilasirkovich, Vice Chair DAB. I am having some internet connection issues, so if I may jump to my phone at some point.
Okay. Brendan.
I'm Brendan Ash, DAB.
And Stephen Eckert with DAB.
Okay. That's all the DAB members we have at this point. So city staff who are on the call.
Bonnie Pahora, Planning and Development Services.
Charles Farrow, Planning and Development Services.
Devin Saunders, your board secretary and board specialist for Design Advisory Board.
Allison Blaine, Planning and Development Services.
I'm Allie Finninger, Planning and Development Services.
Okay. And our planning board rep liaison.
ML Robles, Planning Board Liaison.
Okay. And are any of the applicants on the call yet? I don't see any on the list.
Yes, I think there's one from Oz is here, and then Allison is Michelle. It looks like her hand is raised. She might be the applicant for your project.
Okay, I don't see that. Well, let's wait till we get to the projects then, and then we'll go ahead and introduce them. So let me move on to the minutes of we have two previous meeting minutes that we need to approve. July 12th. So DAB members, have you had a chance to review the July 12th meeting minutes, and is there a motion to approve those minutes?
Yeah, I did review those, and I motion to approve those minutes.
Okay, great. And I'll second that. Any discussion about those minutes? Any corrections or anything like that we haven't already covered? No? Okay, so let's go ahead and approve those minutes. And then that's August 9th minutes are the most recent ones. And do we have a motion to approve those minutes?
Yeah.
Motion. Yeah, go
Okay.
ahead.
Great. Any discussion on those minutes? Is there any need for corrections that we haven't already covered?
No.
Brendan, I think a lot of that was your stuff, so anything there? Okay, so is there I guess I'll second the motion to approve those minutes without any needed changes. So so all in favor of approving those minutes signify. Okay, thank you. So let's move on to public participation for items not on the agenda. Is there any public participation on our schedule for items not on the agenda?
There we go. Yeah, we do have a public comment section designated for this for the meeting here. This is going to be an open comment public comment session. We do have one participant who has their hand raised, and it's a telephone, I believe. So go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and promote you here. You'll have 3 minutes to go ahead and speak on whatever item you'd like, and at that time you'll be redirected back into the attendees list. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Will have the clock on there for you, so that way you'll see the timer clock down. And once the 3 minutes starts, you can go ahead and begin your comment.
Hey, this is Matthew. I'm trying to get into the meeting. I'm a DAB member.
Okay.
And for whatever reason, the link has put me as an unregistered user.
Got it. No worries. Thanks, Matthew. I'll get you renamed in here.
Okay. Sorry about that.
No, sorry. Thanks for being here.
That's because your name is Galaxy.
Yeah. It's a recent name change. I'm going through some things.
Other than that, Mr. Chair, there are no hands raised.
Okay, great. Let's make sure Matthew's in. There we go. Okay. All right, I think we're ready to move on to the discussion of the first project, which is 1509 Arapahoe. And I think what we want to do is start with a kind of a staff introduction and then a presentation by the 10-minute presentation by the applicant. And I think when we get to that, we'll introduce the applicants who were part of that project, since we have two projects. So who's our staff rep? Is that Allison?
That's me.
Okay, thanks, Allison.
Yeah, of course. Hey, everyone. Nice to meet you. The proposed project that you'll be hearing is 1509 Arapahoe. It's on the corner of 15th and Arapahoe. It's for a new housing development for 8 attached units totaling just under 20,000 square feet. The proposed building is 3 stories tall, with some 75% of the parking is below ground, and the garage, 2 spaces surface level behind the building. It is located in a DT2 zone, and it is being presented to DAB this afternoon because it is located in the urban interface area. So I will go ahead and pass it on to Michelle, who's the applicant.
Okay.
Thank you, Allison. My name
Michelle,
is,
can you introduce your team if you've got other people here? It's not clear.
they probably called in and came in similar to how I did, which they may not be showing up as participants.
Okay.
And just observing, they did not plan on speaking. So I represent the developer and the property owner with regards to this development. And I do have a presentation that I can start for everyone.
Great.
Do you guys? Oops,
Not yet.
okay. Sorry, it took me over to a weird place. I had to go back to. Okay, let's try this again. All right, so do you guys see it now?
No.
Share. How about now?
Yes.
I see it.
Excellent. Okay. So we have a proposal for 8 units, and our goal is to provide needed housing that also incorporates the essence of the downtown Boulder character that we see all over the downtown area. We've opted to include native materials, including flagstone and the iconic red brick, so that it better fits in with the area. My place with this particular presentation is to specifically address the areas that staff said they had that we may not fully meet the requirements. So what I am showing here is that the entries are designed to fit within the existing character of this area, which shows entries predominantly at grade. And we have the vegetation and everything along the pedestrian way to encourage pedestrian mobility as well as comfort as they go through those spaces. The other area was noting that the setbacks may not necessarily all match. Now, we did intentionally design this development to match with the development character that goes predominantly down the west and north side of 15th and then the west side of Arapahoe. You can see here we're looking northwest from the intersection of Arapahoe and 15th, and all of those developments do bump up against the sidewalk. Staff did agree that we do meet the setback consistency with those areas and those developments. I also show here looking south along 15th, more of that development character along the west side of 15th does bump everything up against the sidewalk. So we would be continuing with that observed character. The other thing is most of those developments are newer, so we are trying to stick with the previously approved designs that have been coming up into this area. The other item that had been brought up was the solar access. We did intentionally orient this building so that it had ample direct sunlight along the sidewalks as well as the entrances so that they remain ice-free. And the courtyard and seating area along the north side of the building will provide the shade and along the summer months. So the other thing is that the buildings will not be providing any significant solar shadows on the neighboring properties, and especially will not impede any zone districts established solar protections. That's a big one that we try to ensure. And that's what you'll see here that we're demonstrating. Lastly, this just adds a little bit more of the neighborhood context. This is the south elevation of the building. You can see that the materials that we've chosen try to fit within the development criteria and standards that we see predominantly going up within the downtown area, including that red brick, the natural stones, the flagstones, and then also that cedar finishing. This is our northwest elevation. Again, showing how that design elements do fit within the more modern designs that we're seeing coming up within Boulder and that character. The other items that we were asked to show for you guys is the open space. So this is the circulation and open space that are going in on that northwest side of the building here, as the red arrow on that far side of the screen shows. We are trying to incorporate native grasses, and we'll be retaining the existing tree that sits over here. You could see in this drawing. And then the other is that communal space for the residents, the courtyard, and how that'll be utilized. It is intentionally designed to allow for an intimate space for everyone to gather and mingle as desired. That concludes my presentation. Do you guys have any questions?
Let me ask any of the DAB members if there are any other perspectives on this project that you want to see, that you want her to present. She focused primarily, I think, at my request on the questions that we're being asked to address, but there may not be a good overview of this project that might be more helpful to provide some context. So is there anything else that you guys would like to see before we kind of move on?
Yeah, I was just curious if you had I don't know if you had a 3D or an oblique view, like looking square to, looking kind of 45 to 15th and Arapahoe, like on the corner itself. And if you don't, that's fine. I just was curious.
Yeah, just a moment. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I can pull that up. It would have been the same. The only two new items that we got were the two I just showed you. The others would have been in our initial submittal, but let me pull that up just a moment.
And then while you're doing that, Kalani and Charles, I know we had our meeting and you guys probably did too, talking about having this criteria, which is going to be great. But reading through it, I realized what's going to come up for me is that I want to hear, you guys say why you think it's not meeting that criteria. We're going to need to see that or hear that. It doesn't have to be lengthy, but there were two items that were checked.
Sure. Yeah, I think either Allison or Kalani could probably explain what the staff position is if they wanted to jump in.
Stephen, is this the perspective that you're looking for?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's good. Yeah, this street's a little unique because it's not a 90 degree, it's a little angled. So it's nice to see it from, kind of this
Right.
oblique view.
Brendan or Rory or Matthew, anything you guys want to look at specifically?
No, not at this time.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I would also be curious, like Stephen said, to hear about the concerns about the setbacks. And then also just how it's, I think, deviating from the design criteria in addition to what the staff comments were, if that's something that we can add to our checklist.
Okay. So, Matthew, anything else you need to look at before we kind of dial down on the criteria?
No, nothing to supplement right now. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So what I was thinking of doing is to go take the criteria one by one. I think it would be helpful for one of the staff members to elaborate a little bit on the staff comment on that criteria. And then what I'd like to ask the DAB members are whether or not you think that criteria has been met. And if not, what you might propose, what you might recommend, and see if there's any consensus around that. And then kind of move on to the next criteria. So if we started in order, the first one is it's kind of the general guidelines for non-historic interface, and it's on page 12
Yeah.
of our packet. And it has to do with maintaining the historic and predominant building setback line. The staff comment is the building maintains consistent setback to the recent development of similar scale on the western side of 15th Street. So do we need some elaboration on that?
And I can,
From the applicant or from,
Well, from the staff.
yeah, I think from the staff would be good to hear.
Yeah.
yeah, I'm happy to chime in on this
Okay,
one.
thanks.
Yeah, sorry about that. So the kind of been looking at the adjacent lots, on that side of Arapahoe on the eastern side of 15th. There are some further setbacks for, I think there's that adjacent, like apartment building, and then behind it, there's a commercial, I think it's like a gallery space right now, that are a little bit further set back from the street, but then we have on the other side of 15th, especially that building on the corner, what is being proposed is more consistent. It kind of matches with that setback that's a little bit closer to the sidewalk. And so that's what we marked it as partially meets, and just wanted Dab to take a look at that and confirm that, it does kind of match that other corner unit, but is consistent with the other adjacent lots.
So what you're saying is that it's consistent with the newer development, but may not be consistent with the more historic development, which is that little house where the gallery is.
Yeah, and I think sorry, I'm just pulling up the map on my computer too. I think as you go further to the east, as you move kind of towards the RMX zone, those setbacks also are a little bit further back.
Okay. So we need to try to work through each of these criteria in about 15 minutes on each one. So is
Quick
there
question, Todd?
Yeah, go ahead, Matthew.
Just so while we have staff, where the setbacks are consistent with more recent development, are those also residential uses, or are they different uses?
That building on the other side of 15th and Arapahoe, I believe, is residential on the second and third floors, and then commercial, I think, offices on the ground floor.
That is correct,
Okay.
Allison. We did reach out to the residents who resided there, and didn't receive any concerns, but it is residential on the top floors.
Okay, thanks.
Michelle, can you dial in on that image that has the open space next to the building that shows the gallery? Yeah.
This one?
Yeah, I think that's the one that shows this difference in setbacks that Allison was talking about. Is that right?
Yeah, that was one that had come to mind on behind the development on 15th, and then a few immediately adjacent on the eastern side.
Right. Okay, so is this criteria a concern for any DAB members?
This is Matthew. I think this setback is consistent. I know the door entrances to the units seem to be set back closer to what that setback would be for the residential historic use. So I think for townhouse development like this, I think having them actually closer to the street is consistent with that language. So I don't have any big reservations about it.
Okay. Stephen, let me ask you, same question.
Yeah, I agree with Matt, and I think we also have to look at this in context of where this neighborhood's going. And it's so, I understand that we want to honor and think about kind of historic patterns. However, clearly this neighborhood is changing. It's becoming more commercial and higher density residential. And it would be, I think, actually detrimental if we were to follow, the sort of old single family home setback. And in fact, you know, I guarantee 10, 15, 20 years from now, that gallery building will be replaced with a new building. And this is our opportunity to sort of set the streetscape of how it should be moving forward. And still kind of honoring a little bit of what we've got going on. And I really like Matt's comment about the, you know, that these entries are kind of set back in and it's not just a big street wall. Same goes for Arapahoe. I think it's actually more critical on Arapahoe that we look at this anchoring both of these corners on 15th and Arapahoe, with the two new buildings, that's going to set a necessary precedent as density increases along Arapahoe. What we don't want is Arapahoe to kind of be a mishmash, you know, 20 years from now. And
Right.
you know, we only get a few opportunities to build buildings like this. So I really think this is consistent with the guidelines as they're.
Okay, let me move on to Rory and Brendan.
I'll go if,
Yeah, go ahead, Brendan.
So when I'm looking at the elevation on 15th Street, the west elevation, I feel like there's enough. So, okay, backing up. This building seems like a real kind of node and transition spot between this historic, on Arapahoe, this historic housing, single family houses, and then diving right into, on the west side of 15th Street is predominantly commercial. And so I think that there needs to be, you know, this building is important in terms of weaving the fabric of those two languages together. And I think that it does that well on 15th Street, that, you know, you have these entry nodes for these private residential units that are set back a little bit, while still having some street frontage. And I like that. And then still having the landscape buffer. My concern is that the elevation on Arapahoe seems to be very commercial and it's starting to set up this facade along Arapahoe that is it's like lacking street frontage. I mean, it seems like there needs to be an equal amount of street frontage and articulation and building design on 15th as there is on Arapahoe. You know, you look at the building right next to the east of this on Arapahoe, and it's you're starting to set up the same problem. And then on the west side, those elevations are not, neither of those elevations on the adjacent properties are primary facades. You know, they're sort of the secondary, like almost alley or lot line facades where there's not a lot of interaction with Arapahoe. And I know that you know, it's right across the street from the parking lot of Boulder High, and there's all sorts of issues, but I feel like it meets the setbacks and weaves the language of the historic residential with the primarily commercial on 15th Street. But I think that it's kind of missing on Arapahoe, that there's just not, there's not a weaving or an integration of what's happening or what needs to start happening on Arapahoe in that area.
Okay, I'm going to make a note of that. That's not, you're not really talking about the setback. You're talking more about just the design of that facade.
Well, the setbacks are a part of the articulation on 15th Street.
Okay.
So it's how it's weaving back and forth. There are setbacks. And then I think that this one has, you know, comes up to the street, right up to it has sort of a zero setback, which sounds to me like maybe what planning staff is looking for. But I don't think that it really does that building or this project or this area of town any real favors in terms of having that zero line setback. I think it sets it up as being too flat.
Too flat, okay. All right, let me move on to Rory on this particular criterion.
Yeah, can you hear me, Todd?
Yes.
I guess, so for specifically to this staff comment, I'm trying to wrap my head around, I'm looking at Google Earth here, and then I've got the renderings up. And the one difference, as subtle as it may be, is that across 15th, the west facade of, the Mosaic Architecture building, it still has a small planted buffer area between the city sidewalk and the building facade. And so I guess my question is, one, is it actually aligned? And is it just the relationship to the sidewalks different on these properties across 15th? This is a question for staff. Or is it, that 18-inch or 2-foot planting strip buffer closer to the sidewalk than the Mosaic Architecture building?
I would say that if that's the recommendation, staff has flagged this as a partially meets, and there may be some movement either on the Arapahoe frontage that helps to better bring that setback in line. So if you want to consider that, Rory, as part of the design.
Well, I'm talking about the west facade along Arapahoe, that the commercial mixed-use building to the north, which is like Mosaic Architecture and a bunch of folks in there, their west facade has a planted buffer between the sidewalk and their building facade. The proposal does not, but then we are being told in staff comments that it's aligning, that these two are aligned. So I'm trying to figure out how they can be aligned, but one has a buffer to the sidewalk and the other does not.
I think the difference from the staff comment here is that you have in general, they're very close. It's not exact.
Okay, got it.
Looking at, say, the smaller cottage behind this building or the apartment, the multifamily residential just east of it, you'll see those setbacks are a little bit different on the east and north side.
Yeah.
That's why it's been flagged as, take a look at this. It generally kind of half meets this guideline. What does the board think as far as design recommendations? Is it small adjustments or add a buffer to kind of bring that in alignment, or other things?
So let me just complete my thought here real quick.
Yeah.
So then I think, without diving into, other conversation topics and trying to be specific to this comment, my suggestion would be that there would be a planted buffer added between the building facade and the sidewalk of a minimum dimension to at least match what's happening north across 15th on the west facade of the commercial building that they're trying to, use as a reference for mass and scale.
Okay. That's a very succinct recommendation. So I think we've covered this criteria. Does anybody want to add anything to what we've already talked about?
Yeah, I just wanted to add real quick to tack onto Rory and Brendan's comment. It's interesting, Brendan, as you were talking, I was like, God, I realized that actually the building on the north side of 15th or the west side of 15th there, Mosaic's building, it always is sort of weird how the Arapahoe side is a little bit not addressing the street, right? And, and I agree, I think there's a way that maybe this building could address the street. I don't know that the buffer does that, though. In fact, the landscape buffer may actually be hurting the building on the west, making it not address the street so much. So I don't agree with that with Rory, respectfully, but yeah, for what it's worth.
I think just I guess we're trying to, in this new discussion format, guys, I think we want to be careful to, we're trying to sift through primarily the comments of staff. And then if we have time at the end, we're going to have general discussions about activation. And I realize that's not just going to be some black and white line. So I'm resisting I'm resisting the bait here to talk about how to activate Arapahoe, because it's not the criteria that we've been, guided towards. And I want to respect kind of staff's time and use with us here. So just want to, as we move through more criteria, if we can all keep that in mind.
Well, I think that the criteria is a little bit vague, and so, you know, I'm saying that there's two different conditions. One 15th Street setback condition, and then there's the Arapahoe setback condition. I think the 15th Street setback condition works, and the Arapahoe Street setback condition does not.
I agree with that. And that's where I was suggesting potentially a planted buffer, realizing that that doesn't address an activation comment, but is more consistent with, because basically staff saying, hey, it doesn't meet, you know, the historic to the south, right? Because there's these houses that are further set back. But if we're using the Arapahoe facade, it is aligning with the new Mosaic building to the north, but it's not really, because Mosaic does have a planted buffer. Now, I'm not saying that they did a great job to address Arapahoe with that planted buffer, but for someone who rides my bike up and down these sidewalks often, it would be nice to not have a handlebar go right into an unactivated facade. And if it's not going to be activated, to have it be planted and buffered just to give it a little more breathing room, which then further aligns it based on Google Earth with the Mosaic building that they're, you know, kind of using as a partial alignment right now.
But I think we can disagree with with staff, and that okay, maybe that is part of the issue, but I also think that we need to address the buildings additionally to the east, right? That I don't think that necessarily the Mosaic building is the only problem.
Correct. That's right.
And I'm saying that I don't know if we want it to look like the Arapahoe facade on the Mosaic building. I think we want to go away from that. That we want to have the setbacks give this corner building, you know, two street frontage facades, and through the setback, I think it needs to be consistent on 15th Street and Arapahoe Street.
Right. And Brandon, but it may not be a setback, it may be an articulation. In other words, you could keep the facade at the setback that they're showing, but articulate it more. I mean, I will say when I first looked at it, I'm like, oh shoot, I wish they could flip it and put the 15th Street facade on Arapahoe and the Arapahoe facade on 15th, because of that articulation. And I think that's okay for, you know, even for us to comment on that. I think that there's a little bit of articulation that you guys could do without, you know, going nuts.
Well, one of the precedent buildings that was in the packet was the 17 Walnut, which was actually a project that I worked on years ago. And I think that is a good example of addressing and keeping consistent, like you know, where the building meets at where and how the building meets the streets equally on, you know, 17th and on Walnut.
Okay. I think we probably covered this enough. I've got some notes here, and I think we could summarize it. What I'd like to do is move on to the next criteria. If you guys are okay with that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So the next one is has to do with sun and shade. And the comment is the building has a mix of solar exposure on balconies and ground floor open space depending on the season. And I believe that is the extent of the comment.
And I think it's probably good if I just kind of introduce this one as the
Yeah.
criteria asks for this exposure to both sun and shade, winter and summer. And it's one that's kind of difficult on how the massing is. We noted that the building has some areas that have sun exposure, some have winter shade or summer shade. So it's a mix, and it doesn't quite fully meet all of the criteria, but we have to mark it as whether it does or does not there. And it's there, but it may not be worth a very extensive conversation just because of the constraints of the massing and the kind of seasonality and those types of things. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
It doesn't entirely make sense to me. So
This particular criteria is a little bit of I'd say it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. It's
okay,
possible to design a space that has sun in the winter and shade in the summer by the building alone.
right,
So that's what we're noting here is that they have several areas within the open space that some of them have sun, some of them have shade, while no one space captures everything. But because the criteria is so specific, we just kind of marked it partially. It may be fine. And that's what we're asking the board to kind of look and say that's either we find that it meets this criteria because of the mix. It's not something that they need to delve into further, or if there is some thoughts on the board that you really wanted them to strive harder to meet this, then you can make some recommendations like that.
okay. So let me ask the DAB members if you feel comfortable that they've adequately met these criteria and addressed the concerns raised in this regarding sun and shade in summer and winter.
Todd, this is Matthew again.
Yeah,
I just, on that topic, I just want to note that, all of the main entrances to the units at ground level, either face east or south or west. And I think that provides adequate sun, and ice protection, weather protection throughout the seasons for the main entry. Typical of courtyard buildings, there are going to be shaded areas, but I think all the doors leading to those shaded areas are secondary exits, and the open space landscape at the north property line or intermediate north property line, is going to be in shade for a lot of the year, but it is accessible to, it seems to be, but to all the units. So, I think given as many units as we have on here, there does seem to be an equitable access to open space and thereby, views and outdoor space, light, etc.
okay, thanks. Stephen,
Yeah,
you want to go? Rory, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree generally. I mean, it's a tight space. It's a tight site with a courtyard plan. Some of those comments about potentially orienting more building facade to the south could actually play into this comment because it could end up creating some small recess entries and things that would activate it in that process. But I think the private outdoor space makes up for maybe what the lack of courtyard can provide for each unit. There's like generous kind of roof decks and things that have ample opportunity for sun and views, and then shade structures or furniture solutions.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess my turn. I'm trying to wrap my head around this criteria. On the one hand, it seems like it's about kind of providing relief and reveal in the architecture, which gives you light and shade and shadow. And it also seems to imply, and Kalani, correct me if I'm wrong, just new to this, it also seems to imply for the residents inside, right? Not just outside, like are they getting enough light? And so I think it does a decent job of that. I think for sure along 15th because of the articulation, and again, it sort of gets back to our other comments a little bit about the south elevation along the Arapahoe. There's the one section of the building where the two entries share a porch on the east side, and then above that there's two closets, and that facade, is a little bit of a missed opportunity to use you know, a little bit more light. Maybe it's even just putting some light in those closets. But I'm getting nitpicky, but in general, I support this. I think it does meet the criteria. I think it could be tweaked a little bit and enhanced, and it would help with the other comments we had previously.
Okay. Brendan,
Yeah, I do not have any issue with the sunshade and the seasonality of it. I think it's appropriate for the site. I think units 8 and 7 are going to, you know, receive the least amount of, have the most shade and the least amount of sun. But again, the rooftop decks, I think, are high enough that it's going to become less of an issue, that their private outdoor space is high enough that it will get sun, I think. And I don't have issue. I agree with that the central courtyard is somewhat secondary and appropriately internal and shaded, and therefore shaded.
okay. Thank you. So it sounds like this is adequate given the limitations for both summer and winter.
Yeah.
Sun and shade. Okay, good. So let's move on to the third criteria then, which is, you see what this one is.
The residential entry stoops.
Yeah, entry stoops and or porches. And the comment is the residential entry stoops vary and include entries above grade and at grade. Do we need any elaboration on that from staff before we?
This is just another mixed comment. They meet some of them, and some of it may be ADA access, some of it may be stoops. So the board, as you look through this, you may find that, you know, they don't need to strive to try to get the actual elevated entry feature. It meets it fine as is, or if there's other recommendations there.
Okay. Any need for further elaboration? Are you guys, Deb, ready to talk about this? Let me start with Rory. What do you think? Any recommendations?
Well, I think this is sort of the comment that we can kind of crack open some of these facade activations with, because, you know, what really activates a residential building at the ground level is primarily the entries and calling attention to them. And then, of course, the window patterns that support the program beyond. I guess it may be in the packet somewhere. Are the Eastern 4 units, are they affordable units?
They are not, no.
I guess I'm just, you know, in kind of having our attention brought to, you know, the entry of each of these units, the Eastern units, and particularly the south-facing ones at Arapahoe, they just seem to be completely underwhelming compared to kind of the way you've rendered the ones that are entered off of 15th. And then of course they're shared, which I realize is kind of a product of having, you know, back-to-back plumbing cores and things run up these models. But I guess that's the entry to me that seems to stand out as others have said here, probably the biggest missed opportunity. And I'm not talking about its relation to being stooped or not at grade, but just expressed in a way that actually could kind of start to at least be the first spark of activation on this building facade to this, you know, very primary Arapahoe street.
Michelle, is there an east elevation?
There is, just a moment.
Rory, does that get at what you're talking about?
I was looking at the south elevation, but the east portion of it where the units are entered from Arapahoe.
Okay.
So you can see they've grouped the two doors next to each other. There's kind of, they've done such a great job on the 15th, where not only are you expressing kind of the individual unit owners kind of townhome or whatever condo vertically with the steps as they kind of step, to define each individual unit. They get the recess protected entries, but they're individual and obvious. I think this facade's suffering from, this entry is suffering from being grouped because it starts to become an outlier compared to the others, and then not having some of the other accoutrements that the other entries have, which is kind of a landscape buffer before front door entry, and the windows above to kind of really highlight this as a function of the closets that he was talking about earlier. I don't want to blow up their entire plan. I think my general comment relative to entries is that the south elevation entries on the east end could benefit from some additional design and pushing some of the character derived from the west elevations into this south elevation to help activate Arapahoe.
Rory, this is Matthew, if I can just add, because something you said there made a lot of sense. I mean, the arrangement of the units along 15th are not mirrored. In other words, it's the same unit mapped down the page. It seems like one of those mirrored units facing Arapahoe could be flipped in the same manner without drastically upsetting the architecture there. But it would separate those entrances and at least give you two unique entrances, which would tie it, just visually and architecturally to the way entrances to the townhouses are on 15th. So unit 5, for example, I could imagine being the same floor plan as unit 3 and rotated 90 degrees. And you'd get some of that more, like that same language on Arapahoe.
That's right. And you'd actually spread the entries further along the Arapahoe facade, and instead of unit 6 becoming like a corner entry. Yeah.
That's all.
Let me make sure everybody, including me, understands what Matthew just said. So, Stephen, is that clear to you what Matthew's suggesting?
Yeah, I was actually gonna suggest the same thing, or you could do it the other way too. You could have this southeast corner of unit 6 be the entry, and flip unit, the entry in unit 6 without even changing the floor plan. I think that the thing that I know you guys, the designers, applicants probably struggle with is getting that window well right down in the basement. So you're sort of really honoring that a lot. And then you've got the one place where you have kind of a whole unique set of, I think those are windows, right? Yeah, reflecting the school, is like where the laundry pantry is, right? And I think that, if there's some way you guys could figure out how to do that window well and, activate that as the, bigger entry to unit 5 and, as unit 6 on the other corner, or flip it like Matthew was suggesting. But it seems like we're all kind of talking around something, along those two entries that is not quite resolved. And I, just looking at this, obviously we're not spending hours you guys have put into this, but that window well is kind of hanging you up somehow. And maybe there's a better way to deal with that window well.
Stephen, can you put your cursor on specifically what you're referring to?
Yeah, does it show up, or I gotta do the, let me do the, hold on, annotate here.
Sorry, here, I'll stop sharing.
Oh, I think that's okay. I can.
No, I think we need that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Stephen's really good at using his cursor.
All right, let's see. Where is the?
You want the last one that we had up there?
Let's see. Oh yeah, here we go. Annotate. Yeah. So right here, and Michelle, you can correct me if I'm wrong. This is a window well, right? And this window here it's kind of a special window, but yet it's it's going into that laundry area and stuff. I'm sure you guys looked at a scheme where this was a pass through into your courtyard, right? Which would be really great. But, and Matthew was talking about, could you end up doing something with the porches, entry here and leaving an entry here, or I was suggesting you could even flip this entry over here. Something's not quite resolved, and I know you guys probably pulled your hair out with this window well too.
We did, because the requirements for building codes kind of dictated the location of that.
No, I get it, but there could be a way to do it. I don't know, but
I mean, I think we could probably get to a place where we could move one of the entrances along Arapahoe so that they're not clustered together. My architect wasn't able to be here today, but I could definitely talk to him with regards to that. If that would make it something that you guys would be more okay with, so that we could do that. I mean,
I think
I will say.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I mean, I will say that we do take a significant amount of time with our designs based on the people that we're shooting to cater to with regards to this development.
Right.
So that's not something that we're not, it's not like the little cookie cutter or homes that we see popping up all over developments like in Erie.
And I'm not suggesting that at all. And I recognize that window well. I'm just saying you've made this window special over the window well. And I think you could kind of take that idea of making something unique and special and do it in your entry, right? I mean, this could even go higher. There's ways that you could sort of minimize what's going on here, because you're sort of calling a lot of attention to that window well with these windows into the laundry, right? And now I don't even know if they go through, like if you can
No, it looks like it's just like on top of the window well.
right. And then, if you were to punch, let's see, where's my.
Well, let me.
Anyways, I don't want to get into design this, but I think it's
Right.
I think the comment is that it's just there's a way that the energy and really the repetition and energy that you have on that west elevation sort of is not quite as apparent in the south elevation. It's like almost there. And I just think it's worth, a little bit more exploration. I'm not saying that, starting over by any means. I think what Matthew suggested and Rory was some, ways of kind of flipping those porches that doesn't change the unit.
Yeah, so we really want to just cover this conceptually and not get too specific about it.
I will say that is, if that's the direction from the board of, look at this elevation in regards to kind of the setbacks and articulation, that it starts to have that townhouse pattern. That's great direction for us as staff as we move forward and the project moves forward. So
and I haven't commented yet, and I'd like to. There's
Okay.
So it really is piggybacking on the other comments, but the west elevations, there's a problem that there's an inconsistency and in a lack of cohesion between all four elevations, that they're all very different. And I think what really works on the west elevation is that you have a rhythm and a pattern that is repeated, and it does work, I think, for this elevation and for this project type. But what's happening at the entries specifically, that's calling out the entries, is having the decks above. So you have, in our articulation of like the building material weights change, when you start getting the deck and the deck rail that has a little bit of transparency, And then you have the solar shading feature. All the windows are, most of the windows on this west elevation are somewhat different, but they're like consistently different. And I think once you get to the south elevation, not bringing any of that rhythm or repetition or language into the south elevation. The balcony is not above the entries. The solar shading is missing, you know, in that bay. And then the windows are just all kind of rhythmically so varied that it's just a huge deviation from the west elevation. So I think like reining in and bringing in elements of repetition on that south elevation would help in general, and it would also help with street engagement on Arapahoe.
Okay, thanks, Brendan. That's very helpful. So we need to wrap this one up and then move on to the 5675 Arapahoe. But let me see if I can summarize what our comments are. We covered them pretty quickly, but we go back to the first criteria. It looks like we're saying that basically, let me start at the kind of where we ended and move sort of backwards from there. So one of the comments from Brendan was this 17 Walnut is a good example of setbacks on two that are more consistent on two sides of the building. There's a concern about articulating the Arapahoe facade more, which I think also comes up in a later comment. And the other comment, I think that there needs to be more variation or articulation on the Arapahoe facade, in which also it includes the setback, and that that the planted buffer on one side of the street could be more consistent with something on the other side of the street, so that those things are tied together a little bit better, that there's some consistency that may not need to be a planted buffer, but the concept is that we're looking for something that's more consistent. There was the basic feeling about the setbacks on the building were that they were generally consistent with new development, and that's kind of where the street was going. And so the older setbacks are probably not long for this world and will eventually be changed. So being more consistent with the newer architecture is really where we want to go with that. Let me see if I'm missing anything there that I need to add, and whether what I said is straightforward or confusing. Hopefully it's not confusing. I think the general feeling comes across. The second criteria, I think everybody felt that that the sun and shade issues were adequately addressed given the limitations, and that there was really nothing that DAB would recommend. And then the third criteria is really where we kind of got into looking more at how the energy and the articulation of the west facade was really, I think everybody felt that was really a very good treatment of all of those considerations around not sure, I can't remember exactly what the criteria was about.
It was about the entries and stoops and
okay,
that grade and
right.
not.
Yeah,
We kind of
about-
used it to hinge and
Right.
basically the entries on the south facade should be addressed with further design study, which will also help the other comments about articulating and activating.
Right. So the south elevation could benefit by considering treatments on the west side. There was some discussion about flipping units, which hopefully made sense. And then the final comment was really about the kind of the lack of cohesion among all of the elevations, with the west elevation working the best. And that needs to be there's a consistency and differences on the west elevation, which I thought was an interesting way to frame it. And that the other elevations could actually benefit from that, those kind of stylistic choices. Am I missing anything there?
No.
I just had one comment to make about the setback thing. I think is a little bit confusing.
Yeah.
Because I think that the 15th Street setbacks, how they jog, is consistent with the Mosaic building, actually, and that there aren't really any, unless you're on on the Arapahoe side of 15th Street. So it's like we have it flipped. So on the 15th Street side side of the Mosaic building is flat. It's, you know, right on the street, and then the Arapahoe is jogging in and out. And then we've kind of reversed that on this project, where we're jogging in and out on 15th, and then it's flat on Arapahoe. And I think that the jogging in and out would help, and it would also actually match the Mosaic better on Arapahoe.
So you're suggesting jogging in and out on Arapahoe, but not changing 15th.
Make the jogging in and out happen on 15th and Arapahoe.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thanks for that, correcting that confusion. So are we ready to move on to the next project? If we are, I want to just thank Michelle and see if you have any other questions to clarify what we talked about. Or anything else?
I think just the most recent comment that was made with regards to the jogging along Arapahoe. And this is so I can make sure I'm clearly sending this back to my team correctly, is what I am envisioning with that is kind of going back to the moving the entrance and kind of breaking up the facade a little bit more to the entrance. Would that be something you guys are more looking for when you're saying jogging, like the Mosaic and then our 15th Street facades? I'm struggling with how we would be able to do that. The reason we're able to jog, or the Mosaic is able to jog, is because the streets aren't straight and they're angled, so we have to jog them. So I'm just trying to make sure that I'm understanding what you guys are looking for so that we can provide you something that you would prefer. And so in my head, I'm thinking the moving of the entrance would probably satisfy that, but I just would like some clarification.
Very
Yeah,
good question.
yeah.
Thank you.
I
Go
think
ahead,
that,
Brendan.
I think that the having the entries step back from the Arapahoe face would help. And also, you know, the comment of separating them, so you have additional entry step backs, jogging. You know, where we talked about mirroring, you know, so that the entries aren't side by side.
Yeah, make them special, not the window special. Like you could have transoms. There's lots of things you could do to make them more important. Right now, that's the most important thing, is where the window well is, and that just shouldn't be.
Okay.
That makes sense?
I think, yes, that makes
Okay.
more sense. Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah.
And And Michelle, I think it's worth noting too that these meetings are recorded. So if your team needs to listen to the recording too.
Oh, yes, no, I'll definitely be sending it to them, but my assumption was if I wasn't fully grasping what you were mentioning and how you guys were envisioning the area, they probably wouldn't either. So I just wanted to make sure I clarified. So thank you very much for the clarification.
Okay. And thank you again for your work on this and explaining it to us and kind of walking us through it. So we appreciate it.
Of course, we are happy to do that. And we will try to make Arapahoe's facade a little bit more engaging for you guys.
Okay, great.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay. Are we ready to move on to the next project? I see Chandler's on the screen. Hello, Chandler.
Can we get a time check just out of curiosity? So we're at 5:15. How are we tracking as far as, the plan?
Well, we are exactly on schedule.
Yeah, 8+ so far. Very nice work.
That is quite impressive.
Yeah, well done.
There was a few rabbit holes that presented themselves.
We may have lucked out though. So let's see what we can do on this one.
That's good.
Okay, so Chandler, you're up.
Yeah, I'll just kind of tee it up for the applicant. So this is a request, a DAB referral for 5675 Arapahoe, which is currently in for site review. They are in their second round of review currently. The proposal is for 2 life science buildings and an amenity building, totaling about half of the square footage of the site, so a 0.5 FAR. They're proposing within the height limit, meeting most of the by right standards, really. They're required to be in site review because of the size of the site. It was referred during concept review by council to DAB. Staff's done a preliminary round of review, as I mentioned, and Kalani did a great job of kind of putting the criteria checklist in the memo. At this point, I think what we're mainly looking for are comments on kind of the site access and circulation. There's a service road that goes kind of around the buildings. So it's unclear whether that is consistent with the site review criteria. Similarly, just looking for feedback on kind of how the project overall fits in with the context of the surrounding area. And then a little bit of feedback on the parking area and kind of whether we feel like the parking area and its location meets the site review criteria. It is worth noting just really quickly, and I'm sure the applicant might talk about this as well. The site is impacted by both wetlands and floodplain, so high hazard, 100-year and conveyance and high functioning wetlands. So the reason that the building is set back so significantly is to avoid the high functioning wetlands on the front of the site. Also, in terms of the floodplain, the site was approved for through a site review like over a decade ago, and it was never constructed, but they did a bunch of grading to basically elevate the building platform out of the floodplain. So there's essentially kind of a rectangle in the middle of the site that is out of the floodplain. That's the buildable area, and all of the kind of boundaries of the site are within the floodplain. So that's really kind of all I wanted to mention about the site, and now I can turn it over to the applicant to give the presentation.
Okay, so we have Joe. Welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Can you introduce your team if there are others here? Looks like there's at least one.
Yes, of course. Yeah. And thank you again for the time, and thank you, Chandler, for the introduction. My name is Joe Anastasi, an associate principal at Oz Architecture, and the applicant speaking and presenting on behalf of our client, Schnitzer West, and the team. Also joining me as well as John Yates, a project architect here at Oz Architecture. So again, thank you for the time. I'll sort of jump into the presentation and address some of the criteria and kind of go through the thought process. And again, happy to answer any questions as we get through this. So the site, as Chandler mentioned, is an interesting one. We've got the floodplain kind of surrounding us on all sides, a railroad to the north, industrial uses to the east and west. We have our wetlands, Arapahoe. So we certainly didn't make it easy on ourselves. But I think with some of those challenges comes an opportunity to be really creative. And so the idea really is to create a contextually responsive architecture, forward thinking, while also being respectful to the surrounding context and some of the surrounding site in East Boulder. It's an area we've been a part of for the last 20 years, specifically kind of seeing the growth and the changes over the last 10 years in Flatiron Office Park, delivering mass timber and some other unique solutions. So this is an interesting site. Like I said, you're kind of getting a sense of the aerial right here. And as we sort of dive in, some of the context that you've had a chance to review, again, industrial uses surrounding us at varying times with different architectural features. And then again, also an incredible site too, with some of the views as you start to get to the second level and the views of the incredible Front Range. So really trying to leverage that, as you'll see in the design. Again, the floodplain, as we mentioned. And so it really starts to set the stage for the form of the building and how we develop the form and how we're responding. So if we start looking at how we came to this solution, I think one, again, it's the floodplain, it's the wetland. So our building is naturally set back from that outside of that buffer, and then inset on the east and west sides as well. From there as well, we have about 206,000 gross square feet of this sort of life science use. And so breaking the building forms into two forms, separating them so they each have their own sense of place and sense of entry. This has the possibility to have multi-tenant situations. So they really each want their own front door and sense of wayfinding and entry, and not just one large facade that just takes over the site. So really shifting the masses and creating outdoor space, as you'll kind of see in the design. Really having an activated indoor-outdoor amenity area was very important for the site to create this sort of connected campus, shared amenities for potentially multi-users. So the building shifts to create those types of spaces. And then the building wants to naturally open up to the west side to leverage those views. And so you'll start to see how the building sort of anchors on the east side and then begins to more naturally open up to the west. Again, each building wants their sense of entry. So having a bit more of a angular form at the primary entrance, a little bit more glass, and then contrasting that with a more patterned articulation that kind of balances with some of the natural trees that we're trying to save around the wetlands. So maintaining as many trees as possible was important. And then filling in with a lot of new landscape and shrubs, rain gardens, swales, all of these things sort of interconnected in this seamless landscape environment. You'll see in the design as well, more of an articulated vertical fenestration on the east and west sides, really being responsive from a solar standpoint, and then creating this sort of connected amenity. So pedestrian trails, we've integrated, connections between the different modes of transit, I think are an interesting aspect to this that we've tried to integrate. And you'll see the solution of this. And so, with respect to the criteria, one of the questions came up as far as, why the building is set back. Again, it's by nature of that responsiveness and having a respectful, really appreciation for the wetlands, maintaining that natural environment, having trees to sort of buffer the actual view from the street by the time you get to the site. The other sort of thing we're dealing with is all of the site slopes to the north. And so we're sort of grading down from the wetlands, and it's draining naturally to the north of the site. And so it's a opportunity. It's also a challenge. And you'll kind of see the best access for that kind of minimal surface parking really is kind of in front. And we understand, we don't like to put parking front and center of any sort of building, and it's not in line with the City of Boulder standards. But we're 150 feet back from the street. We've naturally buffered, and we've have renderings and views to kind of show that natural buffering, and then really wanted a clear on-grade access for that deck. So when you're really accessing it, the highest levels at that primary entrance off the front for guest parking. And so really creating, that entrance, a sense of entrance for guests right here, tenants getting them down to the P1 garage and really hiding a lot of our parking below the deck and creating this sort of seamless landscape above, and really not having any perception that it is this sort of parked underground structure. And then the last mode of access, really again seamlessly, and we work with Dave Lowry and the team and fire to have a path that makes sense. You'll see that primary trash and loading access, and that was a question that came up during their criteria. But that's kind of in the floodplain a little bit lower. So separating that use as a primary access point for the fire department was key. There are opportunities potentially, and we've been, again, continuing conversations with Dave. Maybe we could sort of get to this point as a loading back of house turnaround and not have to connect any further. That helps us, and we just fill that in with landscape. So that is something that we're kind of considering, and also in the context of this conversation, really welcome the board's feedback, and really coming up with a good solution and really minimizing any of that additional access. And in lieu of that, Dave, I think, was comfortable with maybe, hey, in case of an emergency, we're going to drive up on the deck, and maybe from that point we have the right distances where they don't have to loop around. And so that is a consideration that we're looking to integrate probably in the next iteration. Sure.
Sorry to interrupt you. I'm going to have to
please.
cut you off in about 4 minutes. So if
Okay.
there's some other critical stuff you want to get to, that's about how much time you've got. So
Okay.
sorry about that, but
No, that's great. No, thank you for the warning. Yeah, I'm tracking nicely, and hopefully I'm not boring you too much. Yeah, it's
all right.
we'll touch base on a couple more key points, just kind of set the stage, and then kind of get into some discussion. And you can kind of see the result of the design. You've got your amenity area sort of protected, opening to the west, minimal surface parking for guests, ADA, and then again, a really natural landscape surrounding the site. You could kind of see what I was mentioning before for the overall site, and really trying to address some of the site design criteria that was indicated as partially meets, and wanted to be a discussion point in this meeting. The other thing we're trying to do as well is we've got a couple access points to the garage from the plaza amenity. So really opening up in the garage and creating a nice, connected point, simplifying circulation, like I kind of mentioned, from a gradient and floodplain standpoint, which is why that was sort of indicated there. And so you really get a sense of the plan. And then I'll just kind of quickly, you can kind of see, you can't really tell the parking. We're sort of infilling the lot of landscape. And then again, really balanced landscape deck, really filled in and balancing with the natural landscape fading into the structured deck that's hidden below. And then you're getting a sense of some of the design. Again, as I kind of mentioned, the architecture, creating those prominent entries, a simple sense of rhythm, clear designation between material and form was really key for us. Here you're getting a sense of that entrance between the two buildings, clear sense of entry, as you could kind of tell. Covered colonnades was another thing. And then I think a unique amenity, shared amenity for the building, sort of filled in with landscape, serves as a really activated indoor-outdoor design.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I love your setback.
I know. Yeah, me too.
Okay, let me see if there are any DAB members who want to see any other specifics before we get into the discussion that you might be able to show us.
I just had one. The one question I have is I guess your site plan's turned. So the west, the connection when the back of house service fire lane, comes off the entry drive, wraps all the way around, and then exits about halfway down the property length to the property to the west.
Yeah.
Could you just fill us in? I mean, to me, that looks like if that site was is there an easement there, an access easement, or if that site gets redeveloped, that access would not be feasible potentially?
Yeah, it's a really good observation. So there is a utility and access easement on the neighboring property that extends to this point. There's a sliver right at the end of our property for 5 feet or so to access that point. We've had good discussions with the neighbor about those access easements, which are at least expected to continue that easement as another second means of egress for fire, but it's not primarily used in any sort of meaningful way for the site, only in an emergency situation, is to just complete the rest of that access easement. But other than that, again, keeping our primary access as quick as possible, trying to get parking and get cars where they need to be, get them off site.
By chance that shows the adjacent property and the extent of that easement? I'm confused. Like, does it go entirely through that property and somehow reach Arapahoe?
It does, yeah. It does.
Okay.
I could, yeah.
That's enough conceptually for me then. So that's a maintained connection to Arapahoe that you guys have access to.
You can kind of see it on page 80 of the packet.
Yeah, I was just wondering if they redeveloped that site though. Is that actually, so that is the easement, essentially the existing drive lane over there?
It is, yeah. I could pull it up separately. I don't think I have the main packet open.
Wow, that's a encumbrance on that property, isn't it? Just have an access easement right down the middle.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, that's all I had as far as additional requests.
Anybody else have any additional requests?
I have some questions.
Okay.
So as I understand, it is it is a life science campus. Are buildings A and B occupied by the same group, or could they potentially be two different tenants?
That's right. Yeah. So at this point, still looking for the right tenant situation, having good conversations from a leasing standpoint. The idea is hopefully it's one tenant, but we're preparing for the opportunity to have multi-tenants, whether by floor, whether by building. So at this point, it's a campus that has an amenity that can be shared in a multi-tenant situation, but we just don't know at this point. But that is certainly as a potential to have multi-tenants in the kind of life science realm.
Okay, so it's really just shell space for A and B. C is a bit more developed, or is the amenity space finished? Only finished space?
Yep. So it's planned to be finished at this point. The client really feels strongly in putting together a robust amenity package. So it's about 10% of the overall area for the buildings is allocated to amenity, and that would include showers, gyms, conference center areas, a nice living room, potentially coffee shop to serve various tenants.
And then programmatically, if we are going to have multiple users and we're talking about, science labs potentially, and so when we begin this conversation about loading and back of house, I'm a little unclear as to where, is it going to be like shared mechanical? Is it localized shared trash? Like what is back of house loading, and what are we potentially using this for? And if it is like mechanical access and so forth, I'm just not seeing a lot of, and it just could be the plan
Sure.
that we have aren't filled out, but just as you're building the shell space, how are we dealing with the mechanical rooftop units and crash and sort of some of these services that I assume this lane is going to be for.
Sure. Yeah, of course. So all of our mechanical screening and mechanical equipment will be on the roof and screened. We have a large PV system, it should be noted as well, that takes up a large portion of the roof area just from our energy model and meeting city's codes. From an actual loading and service standpoint, right now the buildings are functioning with their own sort of trash pickup at each one. And so that would occur, a direct trash off your primary service elevator, back of house here, back of house here. We did explore potentially having one sort of centralized trash area for the city. And those would be whether it's gators or something, bringing that to an area that is a centralized located facility to sort of simplify the trash movements. That's definitely being considered. Right now it's by building directly, and then move in, loading, lab equipment is just backed up here. We're planning for a 40-foot truck or something in that realm, just from a life science use, WB40. So that would kind of occur in those two zones, which is why we really got to that point where having this kind of really trying to get that back of house away from the primary amenity area. So that was the goal there. Building A, if we need to pivot and maybe eliminate some of this in here, which I think is, again, being contemplated, there might be a way to kind of, do that in a nice way and conceal it in another portion of the facade. But you have your primary form here, your primary form here, and a sense of entry for guest. And so really trying to get that away from that kind of primary pedestrian, nice amenity areas was really the key for us.
Okay, thanks. Are we ready to move
I
into
have
the?
one more question, sorry, because I think it's really relevant. Is just out of curiosity, I'm trying to look through all 3D and I'm trying to absorb this quickly here, but the parking deck, is there no way to circulate through the parking deck and then basically exit the parking page right and then eliminate an extremely long section of service road? Or do the grades not allow for that?
Actually go up here on deck and then go through.
Or down where that purple arrow comes. Like you basically circulate through the parking lot in order to have service access. Is that not feasible with the grades?
It's tough. I think I've got a site section that kind of shows it. We're kind of a 3-foot difference because our building structure is set above the floodplain elevation by a few feet. And then the access drive is a little bit lower, sort of within that, not putting any buildable area, obviously, within that zone. So there's you could kind of get a sense of it. I think this represents it the best. It's a few feet difference. You can kind of see that's 50 to 30. It's about 3.5 feet or so, 4 feet. There might be a way to kind of ramp that. Yeah, if we need to, certainly. And then ramp it sort of within that zone and get around before you.
Exactly. Because I think
you get off.
Relative to the comment this first comment, I think that's critical information to provide feedback.
Sure. Yeah, no, it's a good comment. I appreciate it.
Okay, are we ready to move on?
I got one just clarification drawing. Do you have a longitudinal section like lengthwise on the site? One of the comments about kind of the setback, right, in the wetlands, I'm trying to figure out how it steps from Arapahoe. I want to see it. Do you have a section from Arapahoe like lengthwise on the site?
I think I do. I could pull one up.
And the reason I'm bringing it up is because, we'll get into some of the comments, is that the existing wetland area, I mean, you guys are constrained by that. It's there. And then you're starting your building and you have some pretty interesting landscape walls and features that you kind of start, I see in some of the pictures. And I'm wondering, as we get into this discussion about kind of Arapahoe and the street, if there's a way to sort of like start to define your whole site, with some of those low, like sort of occupy that wetland a tiny bit, just a gesture, to the rest of the street, rather than like, we've got this wetlands and your building set way back in and it's its own animal. Anyways, just to bring that up, because you do have some cool kind of moves that in some of your other pictures where you're doing that, but back in, later in the site, you've got these things happening, but not on Arapahoe itself.
Sure.
These kind of retaining walls, and it's almost like I would love to see like a 20-foot long retaining wall hitting your the other buildings that are adjacent to you, just kind of as a remnant, just a gesture of like, because it's not natural, right? Yeah, the wetland's there, but it's not really natural. Without something like that, you're letting the sidewalk do that, which isn't really as powerful as the rest of your your whole complex. So there's almost like it's almost like an entry. I don't know how to describe what I'm talking about, but if it makes any sense.
Are we jumping into the review now, or
Yeah, I guess so. Sorry, I'll shut up.
you're jumping the gun?
I'm jumping the gun.
Okay,
love
so
the inside. There's some
let's
cool
go back to the criteria
Yeah,
and kind of walk through those. So we were a little ahead of schedule. Now we might be a little bit behind. It's
Right, yeah.
5:40, but I think I don't know how complicated these are going to be. So the first criteria is dealing with the circulation. And the comment is review and make recommendations, if any, to the location of the back of house services that create the need to provide the extra vehicular circulation. So
I'll just jump right in, Todd. I think it's a comment off of my initial kind of inquiry. I guess, quick knee jerk reaction is you've just got duplicate circulation. So like if you could use the parking circulation itself to deliver you as far north before exiting and figuring out how to tie into grade, you would eliminate, potentially over half of the service lane on that east facade. And this is kind of a permeable calc, or like a landscape versus hardscape calc, that I think is at the base of this comment. So I guess for starters, I would just encourage trying to figure out how to leverage the circulation that's already necessary in order to park, to also deliver you as far north on the site as possible.
Mhm.
Does that make sense, right? Like a service truck could drive through the parking lot, exit the north side, and then just have a short lane to get to the back of building B.
so you'd have the same lane that would just go to.
No, imagine, so where entry drive kind of peels into the number one. Yep. Then exactly. And you're able to eliminate everything between there and plant it.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So that's you're talking about, that's the only thing you'd eliminate. You would have it wrap all the way around to the to building A like it does. You just eliminate that one section.
It has to, doesn't it, for fire access? I mean, you're not getting rid of that road.
No. And I think the
Fire
criteria
Well,
has to
David,
get to that far side.
yeah, David seemed comfortable allowing to maybe go here and get his distances within this zone if he could get to that point and have the right dimensions to there. So there might be a potential there. It's close. There might be a potential. He seemed comfortable because they're going to drive on the deck anyway. So it's kind of planned for that weight.
Is it 250 feet or more?
Between
I was just wondering, I forgot what the fire access distance was, 250 feet wrapping around the perimeter.
Yeah, I think he wants 150 to any corner of the building.
Hose lane. Well, the criteria, I'm just reading the criteria. It says the design of vehicular circulation and parking areas, basically minimize the amount of pavement necessary to meet the circulation and parking needs. So I guess, from the perspective of a potential tenant that wants to be able to circulate around this building, have multiple access points for trash, and have like a true back of house that vehicles can serve, like from building B's perspective, and just the fluidity of being able to move through this campus. If the goal is to eliminate additional pavement, you have a perfectly good parking lot you can circulate through, and then a service road directly adjacent to it that's also just circulating past it. So I guess just combining those would help meet that criteria.
Yeah, Rory,
Okay,
I think
so
this is sorry, just quickly.
Yeah,
I think this is an example where the site review criteria may be designed for a certain level of development. This is a full campus with two buildings that are allowed to be there by use, that both need a full complement of individual services. So trying to shoehorn, just for the sake of reducing access roads, trying to shoehorn three different buildings into the very minimal amount of paving to access it isn't really going to service the program or the function of the building. So I guess to conclude my 2 cents, I would concur with Rory in that I think if there's a cosmetic change to the paving where it's possible as you approach building B from the south, I think that would seem like a fair compromise and sort of break up the kind of monotony of however long that road is, 800,000 feet service road going from the south back to the back of building B.
So let me structure this a little more, if you'll allow me to do this.
Mhm.
But let me ask each of the DAB members if you think that that the design satisfies the criteria, which is basically minimizing the amount of payment necessary to meet the circulation and parking needs of the project. Do you think they've met that criteria? And Rory, it sounds like you're saying no.
Yeah, my answer would be I don't think they've minimized it because I think they could combine some circulation that accesses parking and eventually delivers you to the back of building B.
Okay, and Matthew, you agree with that?
I agree with that, and I would add I wouldn't advocate for reducing access to building A by any means just to reduce paving.
Yes, I agree with that as well.
I think there's probably a fairly low-hanging fruit solution by routing drive access through visitor parking.
Okay, and let me ask Stephen if you think the applicants met that the criteria.
I don't know if you want to go back to the one we were just looking at. Yeah, I think it does. I think that obviously the reason that this is quote unquote a problem is because you've activated the whole site with these really cool pedestrian corridors. And I'd hate for you to just have a super efficient service road, which would ruin the whole campus, right? Because you could put one straight down the middle, right? One, and great, solved, least amount of pavement, but it destroys the whole, what you guys are trying to do here. So to that end, I would say, yeah, I think if there is a solution or if there is some way to minimize and kind of make it more efficient, great. I also fully think this is extremely complicated, and me sitting here 10 minutes trying to look at this and be like, oh, here's a solution is a little bit silly. And just judging from what you guys have done, I trust that you're going to take this comment to heart, that try to make it more efficient. You want to make it more efficient, and that's as far as I could take it.
Let me,
without a one-day review of what's going on really happening here.
let's hear from Brendan.
Yeah, so I think I don't have a problem with the service road being, sort of wrapping around the site. What I am having a hard time with is that, this building C, this pavilion, the amenity space is our, it's sort of like private kind of central jewel connecting, like private in the sense that it's for the users, but it is somewhat public to the site, and it's kind of in the back, but it's located on the site sort of in the back of the house. And so when you have the service road, trash trucks driving by your kind of special amenities, jewel space, where you want people to come and gather. And then you have the parking lot. I just wonder if there's a way to sort of flip-flop and have this gathering parking, which is sort of why Boulder has parking in the back of the building. That, if you bring the amenity space, building C, forward, and then you're engaging your wetland open space, and you were forced to have this huge setback, but it's not really the amenity space isn't engaging in that open space at all, and that now the parking is kind of broken that up. And then you have this service road, which is really back of house functioning, driving right through your amenity space. It kind of makes this amenity space a little less special. And when you have I don't know, I know it's a huge design change, but I would really love to see the pavilion and the parking flip-flopped. I just think.
So let me interrupt you there for a second, because the parking is where we're going to get into that in criteria number 2. And your points, I think, are really relevant. They may not relate directly to the efficient use of land and minimizing the need for pavement. So can we, I think the consensus, if there is one, is that it would be helpful to look for ways of minimizing the amount of pavement necessary to meet the circulation needs. And then this other question about parking and about the pavilion and about the public space, I think maybe we can get into that in the next one.
Okay, so then just to tie back into, I do not see that the use of pavement to be excessive. I just think that it needs to be carefully placed.
Right.
I think it might need to relate to the building in a different way.
Okay. And I think it sounds like all of DAB members actually would agree with that. How you do that is kind of up to them, but we kind of agree with the concept. Okay. Unless I'm missing something. So what I
think you nailed it, Todd. I think basically we're all in agreement that having vehicular access around this property is important to the success of the program. There are probably minor efficiencies that can be found by structuring some of the circulation and combining some circulation.
Okay. Good. Okay, can we move on to second criteria then?
Yes.
Okay, so that one says, whenever practical, considering the scope of the project, parking areas are located behind buildings or set back further from the streetscape than the building facade. The comment here is the parking setback significantly. The parking is setbacks. Well, that one's hard to read. I'm not quite sure what it says. Positioned adjacent to the primary street-facing building is placed within overall site, buildings, and landscape as a subordinate part of the design. I might need some clarification from staff about the parking concern.
Staff is highlighting that it partially meets. It's not forward of the design of the building. The criteria says that the parking area should be located to the rear, but it's to it, and it's fairly low key from the street as far as your parking structure. But there's other considerations like Brendan had mentioned on the previous one. So we'd open it up to the board's discussion on that criteria.
Right.
Yeah, I think Todd, we're having some font issues on the packet.
Okay.
Right, like it's just hard to see what we have some like wingdings.
Yeah.
Right. Well, the criteria is pretty straightforward. Considering the scope of the project, parking areas are located behind buildings or set back further from the streetscape than the building facade. So this parking area is set way back because of the wetland. But in terms of when you're on the site, is the parking area a concern?
Well, I think it's also that it's in there, it says the parking areas are located behind buildings.
Right.
an important part of that criteria.
Yes. So, Brendan, does it, in terms of meeting the criteria, it sounds like, without putting words in your mouth, that you think it doesn't adequately meet the criteria.
I mean, I would say it does not adequately meet the criteria. I think it does a disservice for severing, you know, some of the amenity space from the wetland space.
Right. Okay. Matthew, do you want to weigh in here regarding the criteria?
Yeah, I mean, just for a differing perspective, there's nothing offensive about where the parking is to me. I think that we're so far behind the wetland that the part of the comment that is concerned with visibility from the street and being in front of the building is moot. There's so much more going on in terms of landscape between the Arapahoe and the parking area. And then this doesn't make it right, but I would just point out, you know, Boulder Community Hospital is 2 or 3 very big buildings of a similar use, and the parking is situated exactly the way it is in this proposal. And that's probably less than a mile away from this site. So I think there's fair precedent for a building of this type and use to have parking accessible. And having it in the knuckle of the 2 buildings, you know, whether they're, you know, in the language of a campus, I think I can't imagine situating parking further into the site than where it is already. So, you know, I don't know if any of those comments are, if there would be consensus on any of that, but that's just my honest take on it. And I think when it comes to strictly judging the criteria, I think we're so far behind landscape and so far into the site that those concerns of whether parking's visible from the road in front of the building is moot. So.
Okay. Rory or Stephen?
Let's
Yeah,
hear from Stephen.
I tend to agree with Matt. You know, I think I also agree with Brendan, you know, that there's, you know, boy, if you could mirror the whole project, you know, what would that get you? If you go back to the site plan, you know, if you were, where's my thing disappeared? You know, if you were literally like mirrored it right across here, flipped the whole thing, what happens? And I'm sure you guys looked at some of those solutions. But I think there is a practical issue of, you know, if you had the parking all the way in the back of the site, this is a big site and it's a big campus. You know, I think that creates a whole nother slew of issues. Yeah, there you go. I love Bluebeam, right? You're just done. Flip it.
Rory, what do you?
I guess I kind of see the equal merit in what these folks are talking about here. I mean, to Brendan's point, you basically have this yin-yang diagram, which allows kind of 2 open spaces and a figure ground between building and land. And whether you chose to park where they have and put the private amenity space in catty corner or invert them, I think the building would function quite similarly. I think if the issue of parking being, you know, kind of to the rear of a building is mostly to screen it from the public right of way, then that's where that concern is no longer kind of legitimate because of, you know, everybody else's comments about how much depth and planting and landscape buffers from a screening perspective. So then it really just comes down to kind of who is this building for? And when Matthew was talking about kind of a very public, high traffic, you know, Boulder Community Hospital type function, it's important to figure out how to get to the front door if you're going to have a lot of visitors. And so to kind of send them on a journey through an entire site to hopefully find parking and arrive somewhere, kind of completely buried can be quite complicated for the wrong program. But my sense is if this is predominantly life science, the users of this building are intimately familiar with it. So I don't actually think that would be a problem for a program of this nature. But just judging by the amount of work that's been done here, my knee jerk is it's not that it's meeting the criteria adequately due to the landscape buffer. But just wanted to acknowledge that it would be a very interesting diagram to see it mirrored as Brendan had suggested. It's kind of, do you want the parking up front, guys, so that everybody arrives, they know where to go, boom, drop your car, enter the site, shed your car quickly, and then the rest of it is to be discovered? Or do you want to drive up like some country club campus where there's beautiful landscaping and pavilion that greets you and you kind of sneak into the back to go park as part of the staff? So I think both are viable options, but I think to address the comment, what I'm seeing on the current site plan seems to be adequate.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily think it's a matter of being visible from the street. That's not the issue I have with it. It's more programmatic that this is set up to have that frontage road as being the back of house, services, transformers, like all this stuff is happening on the back side of the site. But yet we have this sort of special piece that's sitting in the back of house. It's just the programmatic mix, I think, that I'm struggling with. But I really like that flipping the yin yang and the mirror and flip would be, and then mirror and then flip it again.
Double flip.
Double flip.
What do you call that? A
Yes.
There, we're done. Yeah, we're done. Yeah,
Done.
Yeah, but then you're obviously the owner wants all the Flatiron views, right? I mean, that's a big thing. You want those western views.
They got them.
They got them. Building B is set up.
No, but from the outdoor pavilion area and the.
Well, they didn't have it before. I mean.
No, they do because they have. You're still looking west,
Oh yeah, that's cool too.
Well, let me ask DAB member something. So this is a site review, and obviously the programmatic stuff comes into it in terms of the circulation and the location of the pavilion and the location of the parking. But I don't know that we can resolve that. I think it's helpful to point it out.
Sure.
But I'm not sure what more we can do.
Right.
Understood.
I mean, I just think it's our job to talk about the program specifically, interior of the building, and
right.
We don't really have purview on the site as much as we do programmatically. I think that could be adjusted. Yeah.
I guess the question that I would have with Brendan, with what you brought up about the pavilion, which I agree is a concern, but I wonder how often the service road is actually used.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the trade-off. It's probably the most private area on the site if you ditch all the parking early.
Right.
But you've got the biggest open space amenity, and the only thing that engages it is an access drive and predominantly parking. So right. I see the point.
It's also not a great, I mean, okay, you got some great pictures here, but that area, I mean, we're working with Naropa right up the street, and it's like you guys are going to have to fight prairie dogs. I mean, it's not like a Garden of Eden or something along there.
Well, and it's Arapahoe, right? Like Arapahoe is a heavily trafficked road. Like there's a lot of road noise.
Right. And so but I'm saying that like that wetland up there is not as like Shangri-La as it probably looks in their drawings. But
okay. I don't think we've reached any consensus, but I think that there's some some common themes that we're talking about here. So if we could, I'd like to move on to the third criteria.
Yep.
Okay. So the third criteria is says the building's siting and relationship to the public realm is consistent with the character established in any adopted plans or guidelines applicable to the site, or if none apply, is compatible with the character of the area or improves upon the character consistent with the intent of paragraph 3 in the building design criteria. And the comment is due to the nature of the floodplain restrictions, the building is set back further from Arapahoe than other buildings in the area. Generally, the proposed building is consistent with the overall commercial industrial character of the area. So it sounds like this is a question about whether this setback sort of disrupts the pattern of development in this area.
Right, and I might take this one because I was getting into that earlier, and I can be quick. I feel like this is a perfect shot to stay here. You know, what I think you could do is some kind of landscape gesture up, you know, up along here that's a little more orthogonal, that's a little, you know, building elements, you know, it could be, you have some of those, you had some round, like a line of cool bollards, you had some walls back in your site plan, that there's a way to sort of honor this street edge a little bit with some kind of really minimal gesture to that line that will sort of like define the space. Because otherwise it might feel like something's missing, you know, that it's not finished, or, you know, even though there's the wetland there, and I would hate that the sidewalk be, like I said before, the sidewalk sort of like define the site. I think you guys could be a little more overt, and I don't think it would have to be like, you know, a 40-foot wide, 20-foot high wall or something. I'm talking about something really minimal. Maybe there's some seating or something that's sort of just a straight line out there that occupies that space a little bit, that defines that.
Would a sign define that space a little bit?
Maybe if the sign was part of, you know, some kind of wall, or you guys could hire Andy Goldsworthy to come out and do some cool wall out front. But anyways, I don't think there's any way around this. I don't think there's like, oh, you need to move the building, you know, you just can't, right? So in lieu of that, is there some way to sort of like honor that edge a little bit with something? Now,
Okay.
I'll just stop there.
All right, let me ask Rory to weigh in on this criteria.
Yeah, for starters, I would just like to commend the design team. It's a pretty sick looking building, and the architectural language is far superior to your neighbors. Driving up and down and moving out there, and you know, you could just throw a Caliber collision sign neon in front, then you'd be good to go as far as matching the existing character. But I fully support Steve's comments. I mean, you guys just need a spore, a rock outcropping that basically grabs, you know, the fundamental architectural tectonics, puts them at the street, kind of architecturally commands the front property line. And I would assume you could incorporate additional landscaping and obvious building signage, which is going to be critical anyways if you got this many hundreds of people needing to figure out where to turn off of Arapahoe. So I think that's a very easy solution and would support kind of the intent of the code, and also just kind of complete the site diagram here.
And you got to make Caliper remove that triangle entry as part of this somehow. It has to be included. That modern facade. Sorry.
Let me keep the flow going here. So Matthew, keep the flow going.
Yeah, I concur with the previous comments. I think there could be something architectural closer. I think the environmental site constraint of having wetland and a flood elevation dictating the footprint of the building does not seem practical at this point in the proposal. And so, you know, there is a precedent all over, maybe not on Arapahoe, for landscape campuses. And I don't, under all sorts of criteria, I don't feel like this is an inappropriate proposal by any means. So yeah, I don't know that I have a lot to add on this other than I think, you know, some architectural element that signifies, you know, the
defines the outer edge. Matthew, did we lose you?
Did I lose you?
You're
Yeah,
back.
back now.
Okay, sorry about that. I didn't go anywhere, but I did finish
Okay.
my comment there.
Okay, great. So Brendan, what are your thoughts?
So, you know, just in looking at the landscape design, there's, you know, the property line does on Arapahoe on the south side of the property line, that it does include, it seems like it does include the sidewalk easement, I'm guessing, and then some sort of a tree lawn. And it's like it that's where sort of the design and of the site gets fuzzy and fading to the background. And I think that it needs to be integrated into the whole design of the site. You know, the tree lawn and the sidewalk. You do have some new, like a huge residential development that's happening to the east. You're right across the street from people coming in and out of the golf course, or accessing the golf course. And I think that there is, like, this site needs to acknowledge that it is it is private, I think. But at the same time, that sidewalk on Arapahoe is pretty heavily used for pedestrian, cycling, bike traffic, and it is so dangerous right now. Like, people trying to ride their bikes on that sidewalk. It would just be great to see the development happening along Arapahoe, encouraging a pedestrian and cycling link that would make that whole area more visible and safer. And while you don't necessarily need to engage the sidewalk into the site because it is private, I just think that there needs to be an acknowledgement of that sidewalk and that tree lawn and how important it is in connecting the adjacent spaces. And while it is a private user and a private site, it's not a hospital. It's not going to be accessed by new people all the time. I just think it is important, because the building is set so far back, that the sidewalk is treated with care, and that it is, the frontage of that site, and what most people, the public, most people are only going to experience that sidewalk. So, because the building is so set back. And I do want to reiterate what Rory said, that I think that the design is, the design and the scale and the articulation and the detailing, I think, is fantastic on this. It's just that most people aren't going to be experiencing that because you can't see it from Arapahoe. So a treatment of the sidewalk would be helpful.
Isn't that split rail fence like probably landmarked, right? You guys can't take that down.
Gosh, so you guys don't just want to make it a public park, and so on this really oppressive sidewalk, you can kind of have one property that lets you orbit around a wetlands?
Right. Just don't do those horrible like concrete split rail fences they did along the bike path, but I won't. I'll keep my mouth shut.
Okay, I think we've covered it. I can summarize quickly. I don't think there's a whole lot to say. But let me give it a shot. So, on the first criteria regarding the circulation, what I've kind of written down here is look for ways to reduce the use of pavement in the circulation pattern. I think that's the thing that focuses most directly on the criteria. I think everybody would probably agree that that would be a goal if it's possible. And there have been some suggestions, but I don't think we have any. We don't want to make any suggestions, really. We just want to kind of give you a little bit of direction. The second one is dealing with the parking, and that kind of gets into this sort of programmatic issue. I don't think we had any particular consensus on the parking. There was a concern. Well, a couple of DAB members didn't really have a problem with it at all, just because of the familiarity with the building. The fact that this parking is already set back quite a bit from the street. And so it's not really a critical issue. If it could be put in another place that still made it accessible, and improve the programmatic, I guess, issues that were raised on other parts of the site, that might help. And we're talking about flipping the plan in different ways. I don't know that there's any strong feelings about that, other than there is some concern with the pavilion or the area C and how that sort of interacts with the service road. That seemed to be one of the bigger concerns, and which is more of a programmatic issue than parking or circulation, but certainly affects both of those things. And then the third one is really more of just a recommendation, kind of a consensus recommendation to where did that one go? I like Rory's comment to define the outer edge in a way that grabs the architectural tectonics of the buildings. And then Brendan talked about also connecting it with the sidewalk and treating the sidewalk in a way that is really consistent with the kind of the overall site. And I don't think there were any other specific suggestions or recommendations about that, other than it's important to sort of capture that edge in an architectural way, and to think about this treatment of the sidewalk and the use of the sidewalk. That kind of cover it? Dan,
I think most. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So Joe, do you have any questions to clarify what you've heard from us?
I don't know. Really good commentary, so we really appreciate the comments, the insight. I think some astute observations. So I really appreciate that. Really appreciate the time. I don't think I have any clarifications. So I think we've got some good feedback to kind of address. But I feel we almost need you guys for a design charrette when we start concept design before we get too far. So, but it's always good to collaborate. So we do appreciate the insight here.
And we appreciate your guidance and kind of help walking us through this. And I'd have to agree with Rory. This is when you showed the buildings, the surrounding buildings that you're supposed to try to, play off of. I think we're all thinking, I hope they don't play off those buildings.
Yeah. Not too much. Yeah. I know.
Yeah. The design, I just think, is really pretty cool. So
Well, the team, we do appreciate that. We've done a lot of work in Flatiron Office Park with double T old buildings and trying to be creative. So it's a fun challenge. But we
Right.
appreciate the feedback.
And Kalani, is there any, or staff, is there any other questions, or ML, any other input before we close this project discussion?
I would ask if Chandler has any follow-up questions. If not, from staff, we appreciate the review and the time. It was very productive.
Yeah, no, I'm good. Thank you. I thought it as well. It was very productive.
Okay, great. Well, we'll let you guys go then. Thanks again, Joe and John and your other team members. So good luck with this moving forward.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Have a good night.
Thank you.
ML, I didn't see whether you had any comments, so.
No, it was a great
Okay.
discussion. Thank you.
Yes, I think it was too. Okay, so moving on the agenda. We have board matters. Any board matters that we need to think about?
Just how to keep this meeting under 2 hours.
To say congratulations, you guys. It was very, very productive, and a lot. We can take all of those comments back on the criteria to whatever planning board and start to leverage some changes based on those.
Okay. Do you think you got the summaries
Devin,
in hand well enough?
it was great because you did the summaries in a chunk there at post review.
Right.
You can definitely summarize those. And it was nice to hear like where there might be differences. There's, where there's cohesion in the recommendations. So we really appreciate you taking the time to do that. And that's also helpful to relay that to planning board too.
Okay.
Excellent work tonight. The feedback was very succinct and prescriptive. It's a-okay if board members disagree with each other, if they disagree with staff. It's all stuff that reasonable people can disagree over. And I just wanted to thank you guys again for spending time with Kalani and I last week and just our one-on-one conversations, just kind of supporting the overall efficiency of the board. This is great. It really makes me feel like something's working. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Okay, no other board matters than calendar check?
Calendar, we have a potential project for November. So we're looking for the application sometime today or tomorrow. So it's likely you'll have a November meeting. I'm not quite sure if you'll have 1 or 2 projects at this point, but stay tuned.
Okay. Well, I think we did a little test run on whether this structure works, and so any other feedback would be very helpful from staff or from Dab or ML.
I think the one thing I wanted to point out, every project's going to be completely different, and some of the, depending on how big they are and how much we love or hate the project inherently, could drive a lot of additional commentary and verbosity. The one thing that was apparent, today, and I hope moving forward, it's hard sometimes to always get a chance to look at the packet in depth before the day of the review or the day before the review. But I think when we are prepared, we move through it more quickly. We spend less time trying to orient ourselves to the project during the presentation than we do just kind of being nimble and as equipped as we can expect to be, for a project we're supposed to review for an hour.
I would ask a question of the board too tonight, because on the next meeting, tonight's presentation from the applicants, did that work for you, having a short summary and then focusing on the criteria that you're asked to evaluate? Or do you want to hear more of a broad, like how did that feel? And then starting next month, we are going to get those packets early to you, because we've acknowledged that a weekend with a large packet, and if you're getting 2 and 3 projects coming on each meeting, it's not enough time to look at something. So we're looking forward to getting you something earlier and fielding questions if you have them, or, you know, if you have requests for additional information.
I thought it was extremely helpful to have them kind of quickly give us their like conceptual presentation. And then obviously Oz is super heavy on the graphics with their concepts, so it's easy to understand quickly. But and then to have them speak to the criteria in a way that, one, they're acknowledging it, and maybe even leading the witness in a way of like, oh, you know, we think we might be able to do this or that, but we're excited to hear what you do. They almost can kind of jumpstart what may or may not be sacred to them to help address it.
Right. And then hearing from you guys too, Kalani, like why you're, you know, that particular criteria is, you know, in question, or, you know, mixed or whatever it is, you know, it's good because that can help us focus on like what, you know, your question about it is.
And we're hoping to make a few adjustments to the self-evaluation, you know, the partially met versus, you know, does not meet or meets, but also to earmark some space for the applicant to respond to each one of those criteria too in the package. So that should be something that helps to inform the context for you.
Yeah, that'll be helpful.
What is there a requirement for the architect to be in attendance?
That was kind of strange, huh?
That was very surprising because it sort of felt like, you know, it was about programming and design and materials, and that is totally the purview. And you know, the architect would be the one to address all of the comments.
Right.
And it was
surprising.
That's as far as I know, this is the first time that's happened since I've been on the board.
Me too. In 6 years, I've never seen a presentation without the design team.
Yeah.
Maybe something happened.
With that applicant has been with Michelle, and I thought that was their design team because it was through in the last couple of days. That's the person that was emailing me. So I will talk to I'll talk to the case manager and some of the planners and just make sure that as we are moving forward, we have had developers present at DAB meetings, you know, especially on some of the larger master plan projects. So it's not unheard of, but I still think you need to have your design representatives there, you know, for whatever technical questions are coming about. So yes, it was unorthodox, I'd say.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else? So, yes, ML.
Thank you, Todd. I would like to commend you all on the efficiency that you went through the criteria. I mean, I hear that it was a conscious strategy between staff and the board to organize the meeting so that you can target the conversations that need to be addressed. I know the planning board, we're struggling, right, with the scope, because we're getting such complex and big projects. We struggle with the scope, and we struggle with the clarity of, okay, what is really on our table and what isn't, but that you had this nice little structure where it says, here's the criteria, here's what the staff has to say, and, you know, partially met or not partially met, and that we get that, but ours is like, you know, 10 pages long. And it's because of complexity, that's the difference. But I so totally appreciated watching the process and hearing you have a complex discussion. I don't think it reduced the nature of the conversation, but I think it pointed it, you know, in a very efficient way. And I really, really appreciate, you know, the work that you guys have done to get yourselves to that point. And hopefully, Devin, will you be at our retreat? Guide us.
I will.
Guide us to have that kind of and I guess Charles is here and maybe Brad is here. But I think that this is a very successful management of the
Well,
board.
don't get your hopes up, Emma. I mean, if we get a complicated, absolutely dog-looking project, that could completely unravel itself.
No, but I've been on some of those with you all, but no, I think that having a structure is a great basis.
I guess I kind of think of it as maybe a necessary evil, because I really like to hear these guys get into the discussion.
Mhm.
And I felt like we sort of forced it, which is what we're supposed to do, talk about the criteria.
Right.
But there's lots of other things to talk about. So,
Yeah. I think that is a good point, because it comes down to what is our job,
yeah,
right? And our job is to review criteria and respond to criteria. And as architects, we want to look at the whole issue, not just the criteria that's on the table. But I'm the only architect on planning board, so everybody comes from their different, transportation and housing and different, I guess, different interests and backgrounds. So I get it, but I think that it comes down to what's our job. And I really, really appreciated seeing that, wow, we can focus, which is really nice to see. So.
Well, and you gotta focus on what's not like working in the criteria, right? I mean, I've been to plenty of planning boards where it's like, oh, this is great, the sustainable. It's like, no, that's already solved. Like, you don't need to spend time. It's like studying things you already know for a test. You study things you don't know. And, yeah, you guys should figure out a way to do that, because this stuff's already working. This stuff already, fits the criteria. We don't need to talk about that.
I know.
But
It's
I
hard
think-
to reel ourselves in, though.
But I think if I'm going to be devil's advocate, I am a little bit concerned that, I 100% agree that we need to have, we need to be talking about enforceable criteria. Like, we need to be something that the planning staff and board can sink their teeth into and enforce. However, there's a lot of criteria, I think, that were considered NA or met that I would not, that I think some of the things we talked about really are pretty parallel to a planning board review. And I think that we need to be careful in that this is a design review, and that I agree that we need to help either bolster or disagree with planning staff's assessment of the project. However, I don't want that to be, there needs to be room and opportunity for us to be able to talk about fenestration. Like, I did not think that, if I don't think that a project's fenestration meets criteria, but it wasn't necessarily in the checked box of things that we're supposed to be talking about, I think that there needs to be room for that, because it's enforceable.
That's a valid point. And I think that, when I was talking in my one-on-one with those guys, I was kind of like, okay, you're showing us the criteria, in a way, if the goal was to make it as succinct as possible, they could have just included what their opinion of the does not or partially meet criteria, and not even have the other kind of relevant criteria for that zone district. But they did. So I think, again, as long, like, if we're preparing and kind of using the packet as a way to kind of have the language of things that they're saying it is not applicable or meets adequately, at least you get a chance to kind of brush up on it. The question is, how do we allow for that? Because I tend to agree, and we had an issue with this on the board probably 3 or 4 years ago, where we were kind of self-reflecting and debating, like, all right, we're being asked if we agree about this criteria, but what about just being asked about what we think about this building? And, so what, I guess I'm all ears as to, the strategy that I thought we agreed to, and we can continue to tweak this, was let's try to get through the ones that staff has identified. And if we do that efficiently, can we have this open discussion time block at the end of each project where we can open it up to whatever, like we used to do, and just kind of let it be a more of a charrette-based discussion. Is that the appropriate avenue, or how can we provide for that in a way, but still try to be, respectful and efficient with staff's time and the needs?
I would say to that, yes, that we were thinking that time boxing that extra time towards the end, after you got through the clear, either partially meets or does not meet certain criteria. And if there's one that any board member thinks, hey, you know what, that one really doesn't meet it either, or I'd like to talk about it, I think we should definitely get that on the schedule for the review. It's really helpful if we structure those things. So maybe in the next packet, if there's a disagreement about, hey, you didn't mark this one and I'd like to talk about it, send an email to Todd and Rory and myself, or send it to me and I'll forward it along, because I don't want to violate open meeting laws. But then it can get marked into the discussion time brackets, and then we can look at, okay, we need an extra 15 minutes to talk about this particular one. So I want to say we don't want to curb those criteria-based discussions, but we do want to get them formatted and efficient so that we do have some kind of scheduling and timing on them.
Yeah, it would be very helpful to be able to plan for that. So
yeah, and it definitely, there are going to be disagreements on whether one thing it meets something or doesn't. And some of those criteria are pretty broad based, like human scale design, and that may cover some of the fenestration patterns along.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there still needs to be
in the next one is if you want to add particular criteria to review on a project, send me a note. We can get it into the kind of overall time boxing of schedules. And I think that'll work, and it'll meet what you were talking about, Rory, is circling back during that extra time.
And if you want to be real sneaky, you just use the criteria to pivot and start talking what you want to talk about.
I know we're able to justify our comments and to fit shoehorning.
Yeah, the entry stoop somehow turned into a facade design.
Right. But I think, Todd, you did a really good job of kind of guiding us back to the
It wasn't, I have to tell you, it wasn't that much fun, but thank you.
Well, I mean, I still feel like it's our role.
Having said that, we should probably respect staff time and wrap this meeting up as well. So I would like to say to Devin, thanks for your time and good luck in the next phase of your career.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. It's been really great to work with you all. As everyone in staff has said tonight, you guys are by far, at least my personal favorite of the boards. ML, please don't tell planning board. No, but it's been really great to work with you all. I'm really excited for my next role. And so hopefully I will be back in Boulder at some point. I for sure will be back in Boulder at some point, and hopefully I'll be able to swing by one of these meetings and catch you guys when you guys go back to in person eventually. So glad to be here again. Thank you guys.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So I guess we are adjourned.
All right, folks. Have a wonderful evening.
Same
Good
to
night,
you.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.